Welcome to the Writers Center's virtual craft chat series, where we talk with writers a little less about what they wrote and a little bit more about how they wrote it. I am really pleased today to welcome two authors who will be in discussion with each other, poets Christina A. Pugh and poets Luisa A. Igloria. I really, really appreciate you both coming here, bringing us this event, and I'm really excited right now to step aside and become an audience member myself. So Christina, Luisa, please take over and share some of your work and have a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zach. Thank you, Poet Lore, and thank you to the Writers Center. Thank you, Christina, for helping to coordinate also so that this program is happening now. And thank you for everyone that's joined us today. I'm really excited to have this conversation and for the opportunity to read a little bit from our new books. Christina, do you want to go ahead, or do I just launch into I am not.
If you want to go ahead since you're already on screen, that's fine, or I can start, whichever you'd like.
Okay. Okay, let me start by reading two poems from my new book, Callbearer, which won the Immigrant Writers Writing Series Prize from Black Lawrence Press, and which came out in late August of last year. And I'm excited to talk about some of the themes which I see we share in common across our work, Christina. So I want to read the first poem in the book, which is Portrait of the Future as Reversal. And in this poem, I'm looking at the age of empire, the age of discovery, when many Western countries launched expeditions across the globe. And I think about my ancestors at that time, and I think about what they thought about the future, which is also a place which I now inhabit. So this is a poem called Portrait of the Future as Reversal. Read porch as reproach, aperture as rapture. Spring has come and gone. Now the crepe myrtles shed weak fireworks. A haze thickens in the heat. Don't you also tremble at the thought of a future which shows its teeth and backs away, swallowing itself? For every discovery in the world, a list of side effects we're only just starting to feel. Some things haven't changed. Cast off clothes sail around the world in ships packed with weapons and lumber. Viewed from afar, the horizon could still be an edge. It took us forever to imagine it as a place from which we'd fall. And I'll just read one more here at the beginning. I would like to read a poem about the native translator of the Portuguese explorer, Ferdinand Magellan. I am originally from the Philippines, and I'm actually from a city in the north, which was turned into a colonial hill station by the American government in the early 1900s. But prior to that, Black Henry, or Enrique, is the name of the slave/interpreter who accompanied Magellan on many of his voyages. And the history books say that Magellan was the first one to circumnavigate the globe, but he was actually killed in Mactan shortly after he landed in the Philippines and claimed the islands in the name of the King of Spain. But Enrique went on other expeditions, and so he actually did circumnavigate the globe. There's not much known about him, so I speculate in this poem, which is a persona poem. You'll also hear the names of some of the spices, which we all have in our kitchens, I think, but I looked for the names in native Malay. So this is Enrique remembers Malacca, which is the Moluccas, before disappearing from known history. Windless, we languish for days in the straits. Magallanes is gone, dead at the hands of warriors in Mactan. His resting place, the watery deep, or the Datu's yard, Did he serve as trophy until they gave what was left of him to wild boars, to ants? Malacca, you are so close. Your shadow or shape almost carries in the humid air. Perhaps I only imagine so. But going down the hold, your mingled aromatics enfold my face. Bua pala, bua pilaga from Ambon and Ternate. Bunga lawang, its small, hard, fragrant stars. Bunga senki, dry nail heads we crushed with our teeth to sweeten the breath, coming before the Sultan. And I marveled at how smooth pods bore mark after mark, how I could trace with a fingernail the lines that spread in circles outward. Melaka, my mouth remembers too the veins of kaffir lime, nostalgia of Duan Pandan. I've learned to say their names in other tongues, at least to bring the mouth as close as possible, before the words vanish the way a small craft plummets over an edge. In the silence, I hear only water's pure, untranslatable voice.
Thank you, Luisa. That was beautiful. So I am going to be reading some sections from this book, The Right Hand, which is really a book in two sections. It's really two long poems. One of the poems is about chronic pain and body work, getting a kind of alternative medical approach, right, to one's pain, especially acupuncture. And then the second part of the book is focused on this sculpture that is on the cover of the book, which is Bernini's sculpture in Rome of the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, who you may not be able to see so clearly here, is about to be pierced by an angel's arrow. This was a famous vision that Saint Teresa had, that she discusses in her autobiography. So I'm going to just read some sections from both parts of the book, and I'll tell you when I'm passing over to the second section. The first poem is called Into the Skin. From everything I understood, je vous suis, voulez-vous dire. Languages entwined in me, the braided trunk of a tree begun in delicacy. My body was still speaking against his fingers. This is what I understood of long, long pain within the body. The true pain of longing, of yearning, an archaic word. No one yearns anymore, I'd heard an ancient woman say. The cloud and sunbeam of acute verbal memory. Epidermis, it's sky-like, a name to harbor galaxies. I know no nomenclature for skin that sheathes an ankle, how it differs, if it does, from skin that drapes a shoulder's larger circle. But skin is the portal, the laminate, the barrier, the reef against the system, or lesser systematic churn. What it may conduct, I know, a harp amid the tremors. And skin is an organ, Aeolian, it bundles, strums, Vesuvian, it kindles, when pierced, it will swarm. She said she saw her own veins branching when she closed her eyes, the eyelids imprint like a cloth crazed in cross-stitch. Or thatched, I tried to think, then closed my own eyes to find my inner eyelid. It's not very starry. It's not even color. It's the closest my body comes to the conceptual. Maya Lin made a river out of pins. The pins on the wall marked the Hudson's movements. Like a battlefield or a soul pierced by arrows, when the pins clustered thickly, like crescendo in music, this was where the wall was wounded deepest. Moving on to the St. Teresa section now. I'm thinking everyone must have a fulcrum, the place from which we radiate, divide, and sublime. So Teresa and the angel work to form a gradient. The angel plucks not an inch of her robe, his left arm reaching for what animates her clothing, versus an amphora-shaped window between them that houses these electrons' desire to cleave. Teresa's dress is topography, a country, an architecture stone made fluid like the skin. How will he pierce this infinite protection the mind created to drift us from connection? The angel's wing will draggle its song, will trail in the wake of what's recently wakened. Its melody subdues to the stress of Teresa's folds. I made of myself a radio tower to receive right dissonance and then legato closure. I loved that distance between near noise and melody, my risen expectations that the phrase would have to end. Everywhere across my body's surfaces, tessellated mordants looped long sound like a blank pearl series or pulses in a wound. So I'll stop there. And so I think there's so many things that we could come together and talk about, languages, history, research in the poems. So it's kind of a nice conjunction there. So yeah, so maybe we could begin by talking about research and history in the poems. So I'm curious, Luisa, the second poem that you read, was there a research process for that poem?
It didn't. Yeah, that's a great question. And I know that I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the places in which our own process overlaps in our interest in looking at layers, looking for layers which add depth to our exploration in poetry. And usually, I don't have a firm notion of where a poem is going. I find my way there in a way, partly by accident and partly because the poems, as I work on them, suggest things to me that therefore I feel compelled to follow. So it's like, the wonderful thing about this kind of research process for poets is that you fall down these amazing research rabbit holes. And then you're like, how did I get here? But then at the same time, you find out that a lot of the process makes so much sense. So many of the things that I've been writing about really have a lot to do with querying place, querying history, in my sense, also colonial histories and legacies. And so I don't know exactly what node led me to Black Henry in that poem, but I'd heard about stories about him. I'd heard about how he sort of like disappeared from view from all the archival materials. And so curiosity is really very much a part of this digging process. And when, like I say, I become more dependent on the speculative impulse in the absence of anything conclusive. And what I like about poetry and writing about these subjects is that I think it's made me realize my own relationship to time and to history. I feel that poetry is one of the places which makes us feel so concretely things like, the notion of how the past is not past, it's not over. We can continue to enter it as an inexhaustible archive, as a source of ongoing speculation. So when people ask me things like, are you still writing about the Philippines? Are you still writing about colonial history? That actually does not make any sense to me. Of course I am. And so maybe this is not a direct way to answer your question, but that's one of the ways which it's made me recognize that my relationship to time is deepened by working in poetry, if that makes sense.
It certainly makes sense to me. Yeah. I mean, it just makes me think about how synchronous poetic time can be, you know. And of course, everything you're saying is so true in terms of how the past is still present. Yeah, yeah. Um, it's interesting thinking about, just spending so much time with the sculpture, with Bernini's sculpture for this book. And so it was kind of a combination of being focused on one thing, but also trying to be able to experience the unexpected
Mhm.
as a kind of meeting with that sculpture. So actually the long poem, the second long poem in the book is called Incontro, which is the meeting.
Mhm.
Uh, so it's the meeting between Teresa and the angel, but it's also the meeting between the implied poet
Yeah,
speaker and the whole
yeah,
sculpture. So
yeah. I love how you were bringing us these lines that spoke with so much intimacy, how you spoke about the meeting place of the body with the conceptual,
mm,
the things that are ephemeral, that are not so hard to pin, that are not so easy, rather, to pin down concretely. And you also spoke about the fulcrum as a place which can be both uh, the origin of a radiating energy as well as the place where things break and divide. So I'm really struck by in your poems, you offer a way to think about those concepts of seemingly irreconcilable energies and find a way to have them speak to each other.
yes, thank you for that comment and question. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I'm always doing in poems and particularly in these. Trying to see if there's a way that something abstract or something conceptual can have a life with something that's very concrete, bodily. And I'd say, that's one of the things I love about poems and about poetry is, being able to do that, being able to harness something abstract.
Mhm,
Um, I never went for the go in fear of abstraction thing.
mhm, mhm,
So I think it's really interesting how these things can have a life within the concrete world.
Mhm. Yeah. And I also was interested in how you describing the sculpture, Bernini's sculpture, how dress is described as a kind of architecture and also topography. And I'm also very interested in mapping terrain, ways in which place slash body are assigned a space within a grid of, I don't know, some kind of accountability. Where do you figure in the
Yeah.
landscape, right? So I also see a lot of resonance in what you say there with my own poems. Like again, I bring up the idea of the colonial hill station time and again because this is something that I came to awareness of at a very young age. I grew up in this colonial hill station where many of the streets are named after American colonial officials. And there are still indigenous traces of the names that were given prior to that, collision between these two worlds, these two cultures. And, the landscape bears all of those marks of both superimposition and also attempts to erase. So I also try to see how language in my poems might capture some of that sense of movement between, like the things that we call places. That the you mentioned nomenclature, the ways in which we assign language markers to things which, despite their perceived instability, somebody can come in and give it a far different name from where it originated. But at the same time, you can keep peeling back the layers to see what is unchanging, I guess, in a way. And I'm interested in doing that in my work. Um,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and just thinking about how you used language in the second poem that you just read for us too, I can really see that and kind of feel that peeling away. And I think that's just so moving as well. Yeah, for the ways that the Teresa's robe became, architecture, became topography and a country and all that. Some of that did reflect my so-called research process because I was just spending so much time with this one particular sculpture. And so sometimes I would just really zero in on a certain detail, like, what do these folds actually look like, in her clothing, for just in her clothing, how does that impact me as a viewer. So one of the things that I talk about pretty early in the Teresa section is that I'm not a Catholic. I wasn't brought up a Catholic. I don't even belong to any religion. So it was really sort of about being an explorer
mm,
of this incredible icon of faith that's also this kind of incredible artifact.
mm,
So yeah, so I kind of saw myself as much as possible as just as a curious observer
mhm, mhm.
of everything that was happening, including all of the
Yeah,
really minute details.
yeah. Out of curiosity, how much time did you spend, in the presence of the statue of Bernini itself?
I mean, I was in Rome for a month, and trying to, spend as much time with the statue as I could. Of course, when you're in Rome, there are other things that you need to do and that you should do, or else you're going to feel very disappointed. So I wasn't 12 hours a day every day with the sculpture, but I was there as often as I could, just kind of watching what was going on in the church, centering on different aspects of the sculpture. And also that was an interesting thing too, is that the church itself became a whole kind of microclimate, um,
Mm,
in terms of, well, who's visiting today, and are they visiting as people of faith, or are they tourists, or what different languages are they speaking, and just all kinds of occurrences around the sculpture as well.
yeah, that's fascinating. I can imagine how transportive it must also have felt to be uh,
Yes.
in front of something both so physically large and also large in the imagination of so many, and how that has accrued through time, the way people have thought about it, the way people have depicted it in art. You also write a bit about ekphrastic poetry, and I wonder how much of the ekphrastic process uh, like is something that you begin with, or do you think of something like the statue depicting the ecstasy of Saint Teresa? Is that something that was a priorly powerful image to you that you've carried in some way? We all have our poetic obsessions, I guess. Is she like this manifestation or embodiment of something larger than, what faith might describe that to be, or what history might describe that sculpture to be?
Yes, I think absolutely. Just trying to get another way into this whole issue of pain,
Mm,
skin piercing. Can you be healed?
mhm,
Can your pain be healed with something that feels at the outset like it's more pain, right? And so I think, yeah, it for me it was a way it kind of organically came together with the first part of the book. The first part of the book
mhm,
I read first. So
yeah,
so it was a way of getting a different perspective, a
mhm,
different entryway into some of these themes. Um, and yeah, I knew I was going to focus on it when I went to Rome. So I had that in mind. This is my challenge, to be able to write the rest of the book on this particular sculpture. So I had set that task for myself. Um, yeah, I can't say it was a long-standing obsession, but it was, just a way of getting at
mhm.
mm, this this movement to describe, as you were saying, things that are tough to describe in the
Right,
body.
right. The poem underneath the poem.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So yeah.
Well, I think as you speak of the subject of pain in your poetry and working with all of the different iterations that you speak of in the poems, as well as the way in which we attend to the body or others attend to the body, I think I also pay attention to, I guess, pain. We talk about the wounds inflicted by history, for instance. It may not necessarily be primarily a physical locus of pain, but certainly there are places in which those things intersect very closely with what came before it. So I'm interested in the idea of trauma and how poetry, in its exploration of the tropes of memory and nostalgia, might give us something different to work with. Perhaps more than just the idea of revisiting these traumas and analyzing what led to them. I'm also interested now in finding out more information about the power of this remembering to return certain things to us. Like, I have no other way to talk about it right now except in terms of maybe our innate gifts, our the gifts that we inherited from the people who came before us, the skills, and how besides trauma, there is also the memory of good things, the memory of how to respond to the world, the memory of how to find ways into places that are difficult to access because, for whatever reason or other. So I guess what it makes me think of is that nostalgia and memory work are ways to reclaim the historical body, ways to reclaim the traumatized body. And rather than maybe focusing on the much vaunted resilience of the spirit. Sometimes I hate the word resilience. I think I would like to explore more the idea of our innate connection to some very powerful things that led us here in the
Yeah.
first place. Um, I hope that doesn't sound too weird.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I really see that in your poems. And sometimes there'll be a list, almost like a list of sort of different sensory experience and like memories of place
Mhm.
that I think are so powerful, and they really, you get this really strong sense of, well, maybe there was trauma here, but as you said, there is this goodness, there's this power of what those before you have
Mhm.
given to you and to others, and I really love that.
Thank you. Do you think maybe we could read a little bit more from each of our
Yes,
work while
please.
we're talking? And now that you're talking about this, and I'm talking about trying to reclaim some of that power, I'm thinking of a poem here where I revisit Philippine folklore and mythology. And this particular creature, I don't know if some of our listeners have encountered it, and it's become a popular figure too in some pop culture, like anime or comics and things like that. So there's a creature called a manananggal, which is sort of like this uh, creature that is half vampire bat and half usually woman, female. And so this figure is usually a woman who has been wronged in some way and transforms into this monstrous creature who goes around the countryside at night looking for revenge. So she sucks, newborn babies or fetuses from the wombs of mothers, and she drinks the blood of people. But the monstrosity, the monster that she has turned into, makes me wonder what was she before her transformation into this creature. So I align her in this poem with another mythical creature, Demeter in Greek mythology. And so this is a poem called Portrait of Demeter as Manananggal. To become separate, divided into parts. The way children, bored after dressing and undressing their dolls, will snap off a leg or an arm or the head. Foretaste of power in the split second as something gives or gives way. How, when you choose instead of are chosen for, you don't have to settle. Tell, if you like, the story of how the God left you waiting at the altar. of your monstrous anger and the blue-black wings it tailored for purging the countryside at night. On the ground, you leave the nether regions of that body ransacked and marked with every conquest. Where it severs from the cage holding your heart, the wound is brilliant as pomegranate. Its innards go on for miles. Long before that other seed grew into a child, you knew the stories they would weave. Stingray whips, deadly poultices of salt. You and your hideous hauntings. How ordinary you look in sunlight. No one can imagine how wide the territories of ice in your sight, how you sustain those arguments with yourself through the years. Cleave or forget, soften or stay, but refuse to disappear.
Mm, thank you.
Thanks. I wasn't planning on reading that, but it just came, as a
Yeah,
result of what we were talking about.
it's wonderful. Well, do you think we should look and see if there's anything in the chat that we
Oh,
can,
okay, sure.
maybe we should also do that. Let's see.
Sure.
Um,
There's some early ones from Christopher Grimes. And this is a question for you, Christina. Do you see a direct connection between physical pain and aesthetic productivity? It seems so, but what is it? A narrowing of the aperture, also thoughts on mental pain and productivity.
that's great question. Really, really complicated one too. So, I think that clearly there are situations in which physical and mental pain prevent
Mm,
productivity completely. And then, there's sometimes an aftermath in which um, productivity can come. I think that it's probably pretty individualized between people, how this works. I'm not sure if I would say there was a stable a stable like one-to-one connection, I guess I would say, between pain and productivity. Um, I think that it's definitely possible, and I think that it's what this work came out of. But I think it's very context dependent for many people.
mhm, mhm. And also, excuse me, also from Christopher, question from me. What are your thoughts on the idea of unreliability in the lyrical eye, especially given your thoughts on history, a historical record specific to poetry? Yeah, the unreliable narrator in fiction is probably a counterpart, but the unreliability of speakers, of the subjectivity of the speaker space that we all occupy. I don't necessarily think about that as a disadvantage. I think it is also a place of useful mobility, within a poem or within, even fiction. If you write fiction or nonfiction, you also have to think about this question. And I think the unreliability of the narrator also takes the form of whoever asks a different question about history. Because as we all know, history is written and archived by those with the power to disseminate the information or to create the record in the first place. So I'm all for keeping an ear to the ground and looking for other rumors of the truth, if you will, or other versions of the narrative, because those are usually so productive. Those are usually so full of the things that you might not even get from the quote unquote reliable narrator in a solid historical tradition, whatever that is, right? So I hope that answers your question. And then Ruben has a question to both of us. When doing research, do you set a limit for when you'll stop doing research? Also, which comes first, the poem or the research? And maybe Christina, you can take the lead on this one.
So for me, everything was happening at the same time. Research being with the sculpture, writing about it. I took a lot of notes. I took a lot of amateur photographs. And it was definitely a synchronous process.
Mhm,
So it really lent itself to, kind of being there with a notebook. I mean, I was doing a lot of longhand writing, which I don't always do. But yeah, it was very synchronous. Again, there wasn't, I didn't set myself
mhm,
a sort of a segment of like, okay, first I'm gonna research and then I'm going to write. The other thing was for the right hand, I didn't want it to be too research heavy in the sense that I did not want to write a history of Bernini's life or what led him to make this sculpture or of Saint Teresa either. So I knew there were certain research-oriented facts and you know uh, narratives and histories that I read, but that I didn't want to incorporate directly into the
mhm,
poem.
mhm.
I wanted
Yeah,
it to be more of an encounter rather than a very studied. uh,
right.
yeah.
Something that organically arises out of the process of thinking about our subjects. I think I'm the same way. Although I must say that because for the last 14 years and almost 5 months now, I've been keeping a daily writing practice in which I write at least a poem a day. And in the process of doing that, I really just want to keep myself open to possibility. I don't pre-plan anything. I just want to be receptive. And I realize that the language of poetry is my preferred way for processing whatever the world throws at me. And then in the process of looking over poems of so many months and years and days, and starting to see connections and ways in which poems might start to seem like they're addressing each other or they want to be closer to each other so that you can see more clearly what they're saying, then I begin to see the shape maybe of an emerging book. And then I might have a more focused idea of where some additional research might take me that would be productive for the material that I've currently gathered and is at hand. So sometimes though also like in 2018 I had a book that came out of Phoenicia Publishing in Montreal, which became the book called The Buddha Wonders If She Is Having a Midlife Crisis. And I don't know what got into me. It's like for 4 months I started writing these poems, playing with the idea of the Buddha as a persona, but not in the usual, scholarly or theological sense in which we might picture the Buddha. And I said, oh, why am I doing this? And it felt like a fever was writing itself out, and I just had to complete whatever that was in my system. And then I looked at them and I said, huh, okay, these might be a book. And then, of course, again, the process of revision, the process of supplementary research that can come in at that point. And there's a question from, I hope I'm saying your name right, Hajer. To Christina, what do you think this mystical mood comes from in your poetry? Because I've been doing research on poets who had a candid secular orientation in real life, but a religious interest always transpired through their work. How would you interpret that, please?
Yeah, no, that is a great question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were talking about it a little bit earlier in our conversation, just this idea of what we get from poetry that we can't get anywhere else. I think there is definitely a kind of a reaching beyond that happens. And I think that for some people, for people of faith, that can be a faith-generated reaching. For poets, it can be about the poem. But I think there's something in common. There's something that the two things hold in common, that I think, brings them together in an interesting way. Um, so, I don't know whether it's the line, the idea that we're always working with the line, that oftentimes we're working with a sentence, but we're also working with how to distribute that sentence over the line. There's something a little mystical or magical about the line. And I think that connects to,
Mm.
things that are a bit more than natural. I don't want to say supernatural, but if this helps to the person who asked the question, I have another book that I recently published in 24 called Ghosts in the Overplus. And the title essay in the book is called On Ghosts in the Overplus, is to some degree about your question. It's about, the concurrence of faith and skepticism in the poetic life. So I'm thinking maybe you might find that interesting. Um, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I read the last essay from the Ghosts in the Overplus, and I remember you were writing about how poems can be this act of what you call radical empathy and eros, and you describe it as one that reimagines and loosens the outlines of a single self. So
yeah,
if that isn't a form of mystical reimagining of what the self can experience, I think that might be a close definition. I think it also connects to poetry in that it involves the idea of being transported out of
yeah,
oneself, the idea of transport as inherent in poetry, because poetry uses metaphor, it uses language that is interested in carrying us out of the ordinary sense of the world into something else where we can see maybe in a doubled or multiplied way. And I think that too might be a way to define mysticism or the mystical.
yeah, yeah. I think that's so true. And I think also this, it's also about this idea of like reading poems aloud. And, the idea that when we read somebody's book, we can read those poems aloud, we can kind of experience them in our own voices. And there's something so, as you say, wonderfully loosening about that.
Mhm, mhm.
And I think, I think there's that too, right? That feels like, as you said, that kind of a loosening of walls and
Yeah, yeah,
fighters between persons. Um,
yeah. Okay. A question from Adam. For both of us, how do the different senses of temporality, mythical, historical, lyric, trauma, shape concrete aspects of your writing, such as grammar, tense, or line breaks? I'm curious how the lyric in particular can uniquely contend with something so unwieldy, like historical time, colonialism, trauma, and so forth. That's such a profound
it
question.
is. It's
Yeah, and I guess short answer is yes. Yes, uh, different senses of time shape aspects of things like form and grammar. Like I think Christina and I, in a prior email conversation, you were remarking on how I use form, different kinds of form. And one of the forms I play with, besides the others, is erasure, where I'm working with historical documents and trying to see what other inroads I might find. So in that sense, in that very plain sense, with that example, it is a direct intervention with the temporality of that document, a wrenching of its language out of its original context and setting it down in front of me in my own immediate moment. So definitely grammar, tense, line breaks, they're all influenced. And the lyric voice that you hear in your ear, I guess, which is when you're writing, you're composing poetry, looking for the line, looking for the way in which a cadence might shape the expression of thought or a feeling. Um, yeah, I think it's one of the tools that we can wield as poets. And I know that you use the word unwieldy, and so I'm kind of trying to rise to the occasion and also address it in the same kind of language. And all of that is heavy, and it has all of the gravitas that comes with the discussions of history, colonialism, trauma, and so forth. But with language, the language of poetry, we're trying to find different ways of teasing out language from these, in one way, the heaviness of such documents, so we can make them speak, in a different way in our own time. And I think I'll just leave it at that. The question is too smart for me.
No, I think that's wonderful. And I feel as if, this idea of lyric time is also something that's connected to transport too, what we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about. That there is a way of being in the poem that again allows us to experience time very differently
Mm-hmm.
than we would otherwise. We can, a lyric poem can take a moment and extend it and expand it, in ways that are completely different from experiencing that moment in life. And it's the writing process that does that. So,
Yeah, yeah.
um, I think that there are so many different aspects of time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, in this book, one of the things I was trying to do with the way many of the poems look on the page is there's a lot of white spaces or happening in a lot of these poems, especially the Teresa poems.
Mm-hmm.
And, just thinking about part of that is about the time of looking at the sculpture and the idea of like what can the eye take in. A lot of times the eye can't take in everything at once. It can only do so incrementally, especially if it's being faced with something as kind of monumental in all
Yeah,
sense of the
yeah.
word as the sculpture. So I think that was part of my drive to do something that was going to say, okay, taking in this entire thing is impossible. Let's work with increments of time,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
having to do with looking and
Mm-hmm.
assimilating and writing and maybe not knowing and then trying again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing about poetry is that it's such a wonderful way to time travel
Yes.
in a way.
Yes.
Yes. Any other questions or comments? Is there something else you would like to hear from us? Yes. Okay. Ruben, what is that? Yeah. And here's Zach back. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
what do we have time for?
Yeah, you want to each read one more poem and that sounds like a
Yeah,
great
yeah,
conclusion.
sure. Okay. Christina, do you want to go and read one and I'll read one?
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds great. So I'm going to read just a short sequence um, that is about writing with the right hand. And so one of the things that you might learn from a body worker or somebody you're working with pain about is this idea that sometimes you can interrupt your pain by doing things differently neurologically. So in this case, I was advised to try writing with my non-dominant hand, which is my right hand. At night, I tried to write with my right hand. My pen stubbed the paper, then trailed leggy glyphs on squares. I copied lines, whose woods these are, and 1, 2, 3, 4 primary numbers. The curviest letters were the hardest thing. I skittered half a gambrel roof to try to end an H. Such ungainly posture in my wilting fingers as they trudged the weird frontier of the page. My wrist had to double back, sniffing with its snout. Everything hurrying down to my right hand, the wind inside my muscle, laborious exchange, the weight of every orphaned mark, or letters blown like cherry glass, like elephant petals, invisibly thickening. This fullness and emptiness I recall from being young, a liquid skirmish when I was instructed to trace the H. Ex voto, ex voto, 6 letters from the void. I feel them looking backward. So many renderings of Orpheus alle spalle, reversing the stitches on the sewing machine. These notes I hear differently planed through my right hand. They belong to the birds who are entering stage left. In that blue window, I fashion my mind into, sculpted clean of everything, no moth, wing, no bird. But I need you inside me, raking this vernal pool. Without you there, I'm all alone in my body. This roiling hunger, the hole inside my trunk, trying to emanate from 4 coordinates.
That's beautiful. Thank you. All right. For my final offering, I think I will read a poem from my daily practice that is currently unpublished. And this is because we were talking about lyric time and historical time. So this is a poem about the moment when I received the news that my mother had passed away in the Philippines. Before COVID shut the world down, I had gone to the Philippines in 2020 to make arrangements for a transfer to a care home. But then when she passed away, I could not be there myself. She passed away in September of 2023. And the Philippines is 12 hours ahead of us in terms of the time zones. So, death in a different time zone. In Latin, the word equinox means equal night. There are 2 times each year when day and night are the same length in all parts of the world. On one side, she was dying. On the other, she was already dead, her breaths having slowed until they could not miss the mirror anymore. The 3 women who cared for her until the end folded the sheets and prepared her body for its last ceremony of fire, for sifting into an urn bearing her name. On this side of the world, on that first day of her actual crossing, alarms sounded on all our phones as we sat in offices and classrooms. They signaled potential coastal flooding in the next 36 hours from a tropical storm bearing down on the eastern seaboard. But what do you call the room in the sky where the sun's circuit and the celestial equator intersect? The earth turns and light can't bend. It's dark in that half of the earth not facing the sun. Could you just keep traveling west so tomorrow never catches up? Yesterday, she was only dying, or she had only just died. Today, she is dead.
Mm,
Thank you so much.
so moving.
Thank you both so much for joining us this evening. Thank you for everyone who came out and joined us as audience members. I'm gonna put the, I'm gonna try to put the links back in the window or back in the chat window for the books. Again, please join us again if you are able to come out to some future events. We'd love to see you. And Christina, Luisa, thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure. And I was so glad to just get to be an audience member for this one myself. So thank you and hope to see you in person and virtually again soon in the future.
Thank you all for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.